In this last section on the nervous system, we're going to talk a little bit about the spinal cord and then the peripheral nervous system. So the spinal cord is part of the central nervous system, and it extends from what's called the foramen magnum, which you will remember from the skull. It's basically the hole in the bottom of the skull, and it extends clear down to the first or the second lumbar vertebrae. It actually doesn't go clear down to the bottom of the vertebral column, which is kind of interesting, but it makes a little bit of sense, I guess, when you think about the growth of the nervous system versus the growth of the spinal column. So remember, the bone growth occurs, especially lengthening of bones happens a lot after birth, whereas a lot of the nervous system development happens before birth or in the very early years. And so the spinal cord development doesn't go necessarily, it kind of stops before growth, and so as the body is lengthening and growing longer, the spinal cord doesn't keep up with that pace, and so it ends up not being as long as the whole vertebral column. And so we have some of these nerves coming out below where the spinal cord actually ends. There's 31 pairs of spinal nerves that come from the spinal cord, and then there's something called the cauda equina, which is down at the bottom of the spinal cord that we'll look at here in just a second, and this comes off after the end. It basically means horse's tail, because it's kind of what it looks like. So here's our spinal cord, and notice that the spinal nerves come out from the vertebral column. So when you put two vertebrae together, it forms a small space, and that's where the nerves come out of the spinal cord. And so for every vertebrae, you're going to have a pair of nerves coming out, and then plus there's two above the very top vertebrae. The dura and arachnoid mater extend along the spinal cord as well, and they're continuous with the brain. And then down at the bottom of the spinal cord, notice here, this is where the spinal cord ends. We're down here at the first or second vertebrae, the lumbar region, but then the nerves continue after that. And this is the cauda equina. It looks like this looks like a horse's tail as these nerves are coming down past the end of the spinal cord, and then they're exiting at different places in the sacral area of the vertebral column, and also in the lumbar area of the vertebral column. Just like in the brain, we have gray matter and we have white matter in the spinal cord, and it's the same thing. The gray matter being the unmyelinated cell bodies, the white matter, that's the myelinated fibers. And so the internal gray matter has dorsal horns and has ventral horns, and it surrounds the central canal that we saw coming down from the brain that holds the cerebral spinal fluid. And then the white matter is around the gray matter, and this is where all the fibers are moving up and down the spinal cord. So here you can see a picture of the spinal cord. Here we have the gray matter, which looks like a butterfly on the inside, the white matter surrounding it. We have these nerves coming off. We have this dorsal root ganglion, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a minute. Notice also we have the dura mater, the hard mother, the arachnoid mater, and then also the pia mater that's underneath these blood vessels. So the pia mater is going to hug the spinal cord just like it did the brain. And then the blood vessels are between it and the arachnoid mater. And we're going to have the cerebrospinal fluid going down the central canal, down the middle, but then also around in that space there that's also formed as it moves around the spinal. This picture here shows the association between the brain and the spinal cord. So what's going to happen is you have sensory nerves coming in, and the sensory nerves always come in the dorsal root, which means the backside of the spinal cord. So our sensory nerves come in, and they always have the dorsal root ganglion. And so that means their cell bodies are outside of the central nervous system, comes in here, connects with spinal nerves that are going to send this up into the brain, where it's going to be it's going to be analyzed, and a decision is going to be made about what to do here, and then it sends a signal back down through the spinal cord, and then it's going to exit. It's going to send a signal out the ventral route, and that's where it's going to attach to muscles and stimulate some sort of movement or something like that. So sensory nerves always come in the back, and motor nerves always leave through the front of the spinal cord. So now let's talk a little bit about the peripheral nervous system, and this is where we have nerves. And so we have these nerves exiting the central nervous system out into peripheral nervous system. Nerves are made up of bundles of neuron fibers. They're all hooked together in these large bundles. Then that's what we refer to as nerves. Around each nerve we have something called the endoneurium, endo meaning the inside, and these bind these fibers into fascicles, and then around the fascicles we have the epineurium, which is the outside. This is very similar to what we saw when we talked about the muscle cells. So you have the endo and you have the epineurium. And so we create these bundles. So around each little neurons we have the endoneurium, and then they're put together in bundles of nerves, and then called fascicles. And then we have the epineurium, which surrounds the whole nerve. We also have the perineurium, which is which goes around the fascicles. We have the blood vessels coming down the nerves, and so very similar to how the muscle cells were set up. So in that case, we had the endomysium, the paramecium, and the epimecium. And here we have the endoneurium, perineurium, and the epineurium surrounding these nerves. There are special nerves called cranial nerves, and these are the nerves that serve the head and the neck. There's 12 pairs of them, and most of them are what are called mixed nerves, which means that they have a mixture of sensory and motor neurons within the nerve. So you can have sensory nerves, you can have motor nerves, or you can have a mix of each. And the only nerves that don't deal with the head and the neck are the vagus nerves, and they go clear down to thoracic and abdominal cavity. And I want to point these out. We're not going to memorize them in this class, but I do want to point out these 12 nerves because they do come out of the upper part of the central nervous system, the brain, or the top of the spinal cord. And so these are pretty important nerves. And for a lot of them, you can tell what they do and how they function because of their names. We have number 1 is the olfactory nerve, so that's smell. The optic nerve, which is for your vision. Oculomotor nerve, which goes to your eye. The trochlear, which is also your eye. And when we look at the eye, we'll see some of these muscles. And so these would be the nerves that affect these. Trigeminal nerve, which is sensory for the space. Also motor fibers for chewing. Abducens nerve, which is also eye muscles. We have facial nerve, which is moving the muscles of the face, but also sensory for taste. Vestibulocochlear nerve, which is goes to your ears, and that's where your balance is located in the vestibule, which we'll see, and then the cochlear, which is for hearing. And so they combine those words together to name the nerve there. Okay, we have number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. This is also for taste and the pharynx down in your throat. We have the vagus nerve. This is the one that goes clear down, but it affects the pharynx, the larynx, and then the viscera, meaning the organs within the thoracic cage, and then also down into your abdominal cavity. We have the accessory nerve, which is the motor fibers for the neck and upper back, and the hypoglossal nerve, which is for the tongue. And so those are the 12 cranial nerves. And there's a picture here and also in your book that shows where these nerves are coming out of the central nervous system and the different organs and muscles that they are associated with. There are also spinal nerves that come out, and again there's 31 pairs, and they're simply named according to where they come out of the spinal cord. So you have your cervical nerves, your thoracic nerves, lumbar nerves, and your sacral nerves, and these nerves go to control and also receive sensory information from the rest of the body that weren't fed by those cranial nerves that we just saw. And there we go. That's where we're going to end our discussion on the nervous system. And in the next chapter, we'll start looking at some new information.